All right, we'll go ahead and get started. I'm sure we'll be having some folks joining us later as the agenda gets moving here, but for now, we should probably go ahead and get started. We want to welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for another installment of our research webinar series hosted by our team here at the Michigan Virtual Learning Research Institute, or MVLRI. The goal of MVLRI is to expand Michigan's capacity to support new learning models, engage in active research to inform new policies in online and blended learning, and strengthen the state's infrastructures for sharing best practices. MVLRI is a division of MVU, or the Michigan Virtual University, a nonprofit organization whose mission is advancing K-12 education through digital learning, research, innovation, policy, and partnerships. MVU is also the parent company of Michigan Virtual School, a supplemental state-sponsored virtual school, Michigan LearnPort, an online professional development portal for K-12 educators and personnel, and MyBlend, a blended learning initiative providing K-12 schools with resources, products, and services to personalize learning options for their students and improve student achievement. Just a quick disclaimer before we get going today. This webinar will be recorded and shared publicly. Consequently, anything shared during this webinar, including chat comments, could be shared publicly. This webinar may represent a presenter's or an attendee's personal views, opinions, conclusions, and other information which do not necessarily reflect those of MVU and/or the Michigan Virtual Learning Research Institute and are not given nor endorsed by MVU/MVLRI unless otherwise specified. Today we have with us Victoria Raish, a PhD candidate at Pennsylvania State University. Her field is learning design and technology, and she is especially interested in online learning. She's presented at many conferences, both national and regional, and has additionally published in leading journals and books within the field. She also has 3 beautiful little girls and enjoys running in her spare time. We'll be hearing from Victoria today on communication practices in K-12 online learning. With that, I'll hand it over to Victoria.
Okay, thanks, Justin. So like Justin said, my name is Victoria. This presentation is based off of a paper that I had written for the SITE conference with an undergraduate honors student that I mentored in her honors thesis. What we did was develop a survey, and it got sent out to middle school students in one cyber charter school in Pennsylvania, and asked them primarily about their communication and interaction that they engage with in their science courses, and also basic essential information about the cyber charter school, like how many hours they spend a day in school, if anyone else uses their school computer, why they made the decision to go to cyber charter schools. So that will be the brunt of the second half of the presentation, but first, I kind of frame that with the literature that's kind of already out there on online communication. Okay, so hopefully you will feel very welcome to use the chat box and engage. I have a lot of polls and questions to make this more of a discussion in addition to the information I'm sharing out. So this is the first poll that I have, and it says, what is your role in the online environment? Okay. Andrew, do you teach online at an online school or? Okay. So my previous experience before I started in the PhD program here at Penn State was that I was a middle school teacher at a hybrid charter school. So even though we had students who physically came to the school site, which was really just an office building, I taught them online as well as the students that were distance. Yeah, yeah. Apparently, it is a new and up-and-coming thing in higher education to do flex learning models, which is basically what that was. Students could come to site or they could stay. I didn't even realize that was innovative at the time that I taught there. Okay, yeah, I am too. So this research was with a exclusively online school, but so I've taken a lot of online classes and I've taken a lot of face-to-face classes and taught both ways. Um, the importance of communication online, I think, is sometimes overlooked by designers or faculty who expect students to just automatically know how to communicate and engage in the online environment. So you have to be very descriptive, which is what this slide is trying to say, in how exactly you want students to turn in their assignments and receive feedback on them. I know teachers in the online environment generally have a lot of students, and it helps them to just have, common organization practices for the students to do with turning in their work and whatnot. And also for the students, they don't have the affordance of contextualizing what the teacher is saying, what the instructor is saying, and especially K-12 students who are in the online environment at the elementary age and middle school. It could be their first foray into online learning, and so to learn how to successfully succeed in those environments, it helps to be descriptive. Okay, so I like to use an idea from linguistics to make this clear. So like an example of something that would be an indexical is today is always the biggest party day of the year. Well, if you were face to face with somebody, that could be easy to understand. But if you're online, something like that, the meaning could get lost in translation. And then a descriptive would be if we were talking to each other on November 2nd instead of now, the day of our conversation would be the biggest party day of the year. So it's much more clear what is being referenced and easy to understand. So for the research that we did, we used Garrison and Arbaugh's Community of Inquiry Framework, which the research that we had done on that in the lit reviews really seemed to use that for a higher education online learning environment, but we applied it to the middle school level. So there are three components of the community of inquiry framework, and one of them is social presence. So to succeed in an online environment, there needs to be social presence, and they define it as open communication, group cohesion, and effective expression. So those were, we really tried to find out that information from the students that we had surveyed. And Hannah Mintzmoyer graduated and is now a full-time teacher at a large school district right north of Pittsburgh. But at the time of the research, she was finishing up her honors thesis. Okay, so this is what kind of anyone involved with online learning wants to avoid, right? The possible isolation of online learning. So I think that it's entirely possible to complete a whole degree online without ever engaging in a high level of sustained interaction with your peers or teachers. So do you find that true at the K-12 level as well, or is interaction more required there? Yeah, if they're completely virtual. Yeah. I took so one of the classes, the first class I took online was organic chemistry, which I don't recommend taking online. But the way that the university I had taken it through had the class set up was that we only met once a week and it was only through a chat window. And so you could ask professors questions through the chat window, and that was the only interaction that you got. And I was the only student who took advantage of that. But I completely agree that being able to collaborate online is an important skill. It's a skill I tried to foster when I taught online, but some students were fairly resistant to engaging with that competency. So in your research or your teaching online, have you found that Web 2.0 tools are extremely crucial to supporting that interaction? You text message. So Jared, do you create asynchronous videos of yourself and then students also do that? Okay. Do you get really engaging interactions if it's a voice thread? Or do you see a difference between those two platforms in terms of the interaction and response to the videos? Okay. That's good. It probably depends on the discussion board too. I know that people here have a lot of complaints about Angel, but hopefully we're retiring it soon. So um, I think one of the most important things that Web 2.0 tools can do, especially if you do video or something like that, is it's easy to transfer knowing that in an online environment, but not as easy for knowing how. So I found I had struggles when I would teach science online of if students actually knew how to apply something or knew how something would fit, a concept would fit in terms of what scientists are actually doing out in the field. And by using videos or a presentation they could create or a concept map they could create, I could get more at that knowing how question versus just recalling the facts. Um, so I've designed my fair share of online courses, and these are just kind of suggestions that I've learned that you all probably have learned as well about how to prevent isolation in that environment. So if student contributions were not immediately responded to, you know, the feedback and the momentum of that conversation or that student's thought process could get cut off, and I've seen it lead to demotivation of students that they had a really good idea or wanted to contribute something, and they didn't get a response from the professor or from their peers. Um, Sometimes students don't feel a connection with their instructor. Um, I find this to be the case. Yeah, students have anxiety over that. Yeah, and it's hard to address, right? So I like to maintain the rule of feedback is 24 hours on a weekday, 48 hours on the weekend. Normally, I would respond a lot faster than that, especially if you have a smartphone, you can just check real quick if a student responded to something or tweeted something, or you could text them, like Andrew said. Then their queries can be responded to much more quickly. But that places a demand on the instructor. There's no downtime or no away time from students like there is in a face-to-face environment. I think that it requires an extra effort and more work on the part of the instructor or designer to build in supports that can foster the community. And then to actually use those supports in a way that brings students together and gets them beyond just meeting together to go over assignments, to create the community that's there for students a lot of times face to face. And like Andrew said, texting and reminding students, for students to have that one-to-one relationship with their teacher, their instructor, right? So we can have all the technology we want and all of the cool features that we want, but the teacher still makes the biggest difference for student learning and in the class. And so if a student feels, I think if the teacher makes a deliberate effort online to connect with the student, it can help them. Welcome, Diane. I just saw your name pop up. But it can help them succeed in the class if they feel like the teacher is supporting them. So this is the COI framework that we used. We really focused on building the sense of community and support. That's supposed to say support. I must have been hungry. Support for deep learning. And the reason why we felt it was important to go to the K-12 level is the impact of collaboration on middle school students in cyber charter schools. It's still relatively unknown, and it's not easy to assess collaboration online. What kind of collaboration do you look for? What do you focus on? What kind of study do you set up? How do you assess both the group and the individual collaboration? So ideally, we would have liked to do a qualitative study and get in there and really do protocols with the students that would get deeper into their thoughts on communication and how it's affecting them in their cyber charter school, but just with time restraints and even finding a cyber charter school to work with. It was hard enough for us to get them to distribute a survey to students. So these are some of the challenges of collaborating in that environment. To externalize and articulate their knowledge before they internalize it. Learning, students may choose to go online because they like to be alone. They like to work alone. So how do you engage students who are more solitary in their learning? And then how do you get them to want to collaborate? What strategies do you use? And despite how a lot of researchers and teachers view collaboration as beneficial, students generally do not view discussion or collaboration as helping their learning. And that was from Kim, and Karimi. And at the end of this presentation, I have a Word doc with a lot of useful references. So I don't know how familiar everyone is with cyber charter schools specifically. And I know that there's some differences in how they're arranged state by state. But cyber charter schools are a large movement within the state of Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is one of the leaders in them. So in 2013, 2014, there were 14 cyber charter school students, or cyber charter schools, and they were serving just under 35,000 students in the state of PA. So that is a lot of students who are receiving their education in this, through this online environment. And the way students experience their education raises new questions about, how successful they are, how to measure the impact and the success of cyber charter schools, how to focus on their innovation, and the way that they deliver their instruction. So for many cyber charter schools in Pennsylvania, they use asynchronous classes, or they do synchronous classes but also record them. So when I taught, I had some students who worked, some secondary students who would work full-time during the day, and I would record lessons or record demonstrations, and then they could get on at night and watch them through Adobe. So in a cyber charter school, students are expected to be independent workers and be able to self-regulate, manage their responsibilities, manage their assignments a lot more than in a face-to-face environment, especially at a younger age. So I know at the elementary school level, parents or guardians are highly involved in their students' learning and getting them to turn in assignments, and are really a partner in their students' success. Students need to have technology literacy to navigate in this environment and to know how to manipulate different tools, to use course management systems. And teachers can do a lot to support that, right? Teachers can create Jing tutorials or accessibility videos of how to go through Moodle or whatever other CMS they're using. So this is kind of more about our study, and I'll be getting to the results here in a minute. We wanted to see how they perceive interaction as impacting their educational experience. So ideally, that would have been good to get through a qualitative study, but this gets some research out there so other researchers can take it and run with it and do more work with it. So I guess a weakness of our study is that I would critique it as we're not assessing specific collaborative activities from a computer-supported collaborative learning perspective, and just took it at the survey level of, are students doing this communication and collaboration? How do they perceive it? Okay, so our sample size, the response rate we had was 20. So what happened for us to distribute the survey, and maybe some of you have had more success getting in there in cyber charter schools, and this would be a good discussion to have. But first, we had a really hard time even finding a cyber charter school who was willing to work with us on the research. A lot of cyber charter schools, there's negative publicity, the results aren't good, they're cautious of what people are wanting to show, what researchers are going to portray them as. And so we received a lot of resistance of even them being willing to engage in research with us. And then we were not allowed to, go in there and recruit students or let them know about the survey. Oh, that's great, Jared. Yeah, my dissertation is for cyber charter schools too. Some have been welcoming and some have not. So the cyber charter school we found ended up being welcoming, but we wanted to, be able to get in there and send recruitment emails and recruit students. And due to their geographic, variability across the state, it wasn't feasible to go there and distribute a survey or to go to students' houses. So we wanted to be able to build that network and let students know what we were doing and kind of introduce ourselves to students. But they were not comfortable with that. They took our survey link and posted it to the course management system under the science class for the middle school students. So not only that, but then the parents had to go into the course management system and give their consent for the students to complete the survey, and then the students were responsible for going in and completing it. So our completion rate for the parents who consented was 38%, which is a very small proportion of the school, of the students enrolled in the middle school, but for the parents, for the consent population, it was better. So a limitation of our survey is the generalizability of the findings, but since there's so little out there on cyber charter schools, it still provides some valuable information and descriptive information. Yeah, and we didn't have any kind of compensation or rewards for the students, so it was really all on them to want to give us this information. So we don't have to do the poll because we kind of already talked about getting a large sample to engage in the research. Jared said that he has had difficulty. So has anyone else had experience with getting successfully recruiting students in the online environment to engage in research? Mm. Yeah, it's a lot more, parents are expected to be involved in their students' education in an online environment. So from some of the previous research we just found that students and parents can underestimate the amount of active learning, self-regulation, and engagement that students must have to be successful in the online environment. So this is the profile of the school that we looked at. So they use the K-12 curriculum provided by K-12. Students are able to go into their assessments and retake them if they fail until they succeed in that informal assessment. Teachers are expected to individualize plans for each student staying within the curriculum. And their website specifically states that the curriculum expects students will be having Socratic conversations with teachers, but doesn't emphasize or doesn't describe what those are or how they're accomplished. So there's a 50-to-1 student ratio, and you can see the other statistics there. So this is an example of a unit that they would encounter in their science class. So they're learning about waves, sound, and light, and this is just kind of, a reading an online textbook type of example. So from the students who answered our survey, these are some of the demographics of them. So females were 70%, males were 30%, which I tend to find true in even research that I've done on campus here at Penn State. The majority of participants were white, with 20% being African American and 10% Asian American. Okay, so we asked students, and this is a really interesting finding, and kind of continues some of the work from like Forte and Gonzalez, is we asked students how much time they're spending on schoolwork daily. So if you start at the top of the pie chart and then work your way around clockwise, that is how the color coding works. So the top, 12, 15% there is 1 to 2 hours. 2 to 3 hours. The largest spent is 3 to 4, and then 4 to 5. That takes up more than half the chart. And then some students are spending 7 to 8 hours on their schoolwork. So, what does this mean for students? They're only spending 1 to 2 to 3 hours on schoolwork daily. How do we count seat time and credit hours in the online environment? How can you ensure that students are getting that 180 days of school if they're going to a public school, required to graduate and be promoted to the next grade level? So even though we have a small sample size, this is a finding that, I think that is interesting from a policy standpoint of how do we ensure students are completing the hours they need to in the online environment. Okay, so then we asked students their reasons for attending the cyber charter school, and students could, this was multi-select, so students could select all of these reasons, none of these reasons. So as you can see from the findings, the largest response was parent. It was a parent or guardian decision for them to go into the online environment, and that they enjoyed being able to stay home and go to school. And then bullying and social anxiety had a fairly high response rate. And then the other ones were smaller, but those are also factors affecting their decision to go to cyber charter school that other researchers have explored. Okay, so we found it interesting to look at, even though there was only 6 respondents for both bullying and social anxiety, to look at their interaction and engagement in the online environment. Because if they responded that way, they may have had, and this is where an interview would have been nice, but they may have had negative interactions or negative experiences of collaborating and group work and communication in their previous schools. And how does that translate to being in an online environment? Does it help them? How do they compare to students who don't identify as being bullied or having social anxiety? So these were interaction with peer responses. So if you look at the far column, it is the overall population mean. The middle column is students who identified as having social anxiety. And the first column is the bullied mean. So the way that I interpreted these findings were students who are bullied have a lower average score for being connected and interacting with their peers. And you can see the questions that we had there about interaction with peers. Then the overall population mean, but students with social anxiety scored higher. So this is, I think, a finding that could be used for more research, for researchers to use or for teachers to use. But my initial thought on it was, well, students who have social anxiety, online social anxiety may be different than face-to-face social anxiety, and maybe they feel more comfortable in this kind of less time-pressured environment where they have a chance to really think about and respond to for the collaboration, and it doesn't require as much public speaking or speaking up in front of the class. Whereas cyberbullying, we all know, still exists at a very high rate, and so maybe students who were bullied face-to-face are still, receiving that bullying in the online environment. But that's just my initial thoughts and interpretation of it. We weren't able to really ask or probe the students the questions, but it would be great to be able to do that. So these questions revolved around how students' communication, how they felt that it impacted their learning, and the flow that they experienced in their classes. So the highest mean you could have gotten was the max was a 6. So for the most part, the means were fairly high, which was good. I thought was good. So students generally feel comfortable learning, generally are able to defend their ideas and receive a quick response. The mean that was the lowest gives me opportunities to work with other students. And with the big talk about group work and peer review and collaborating with peers and learning in a community and learning in a social setting, I think there's a lot of potential to improve the environment for students to engage in interacting with their peers. Okay, well, that's good to know since we had such a limited sample. We were afraid to make a lot of generalizations or do statistical assumptions on it. So generally, students found that interaction helped to support their science learning and that it was positive interaction. But once again, the interactions with peers and teachers was lower than just how they perceive interaction in their whole online schooling environment. So how can teachers and designers really design the course so that students find it easier to interact with peers and that they can engage in this kind of back and forth banter that they may not be getting. Okay, so those were the most interesting findings that we had from the research, from the study that we did. Due to the small sample size, as I said, we cannot conclude, generalize to the larger population, but I think that with the limited amount of research that's out there on cyber charter schools, that a lot of further research can focus on peer interactions, designing online environments that foster those peer interactions, how to build a sense of community in students' online environment, how teachers, virtual teachers, view their relationship building skills with students in the online environment, student choice in the cyber charter schools, why they decide to go there, and students' perceptions of how they learn in the online environment. And just from a policy perspective, how do we really quantify student attendance on a day-to-day basis in the online environment? So hopefully now we have some time for discussion. There's about 20 minutes left, so I wanted to leave some time for us to kind of just go back and forth in the chat box and talk about, any of these findings you found interesting or any ideas you have to further the research findings that we had, or how to support students in communicating online. Yeah, so my dissertation is not directly following up on this research. And so I guess that question is, it depends. I would like to follow up on the research. I've applied for one tenure track opening because I'm graduating this spring. But I need a job. So I also do research in libraries. So I'm applying for some online librarian positions. And so it all depends on where I get hired. But if I would get hired in an LDT, Learning Design Technology program, yes, I would like to follow up on the research and kind of get in there and do more qualitative, phenomenological type work. Yep, no problem. I'll have to go to your university and check out the research you've been doing. So, Tara, Diane, do you have any comments or thoughts about the research findings or anything interesting in them? Thank you. Okay. Yeah, that's really what my dissertation is focused on, is online middle school science learning. Yeah. Oh, that's okay. Yeah, I'm late all the time to many things, so no worries. Yeah, my dissertation is going to be a ethnographic content analysis of the virtual labs that students are using in cyber charter schools to identify markers that are there for students to engage in the science practices and cross-cutting concepts and core ideas that the next generation science standards emphasize. Thank you for that tip. I've actually had very good communication interaction with Connections Academy, so that's good. Just the cyber charter school in PA that they have, Commonwealth. Okay, good to know. So in that file there where it says file 2, it's many relevant references from the site paper and from Hannah's master's thesis, and then from additional research that I found when preparing this presentation. And Hannah really did the brunt of the research, as it was her honors thesis. So I helped her and guided her, but she really did a lot of the analysis and whatnot on her own. So thank you for everyone that came. I know people are busy in the summer.
Thank you so much, Victoria, for presenting today. This was really informative. Some great work being done in a field that I think needs some more attention, as you said. Kind of a growing sample size as this area of focus begins to expand. Thanks all of you for attending and for being so participatory in the chat window. We really appreciate that. It helps when we have a small group that people are so participatory and help to provide a better conversation around the topic at hand. So we really do appreciate that. We just want to mention a couple of our ongoing initiatives before we wrap up today. Be sure to check out our podcast series, the Virtual Viewpoints podcast series, which you can click from the presentation there and download all of or stream all of our episodes on SoundCloud there. We also have a guest blogger program, so if you're interested in writing for us, you can click that link there to learn all about what writing for us might entail. You can check out our own blog series that we maintain. We have recently been undertaking a series on college and career readiness, where we've been looking at post-secondary distance education enrollment in the US and here in Michigan, and trying to compare those figures and just trying to see what those enrollment figures look like. And in an upcoming post that we're looking at, we'll be talking about how colleges and universities are preparing students to take those online courses once they actually enter post-secondary education. So if you'd like to check that out, go ahead and click the link there, and you can actually, from our MVLRI.org website, get to our blog page. Want to make reference to our upcoming webinar, Tuesday, August 11th at 2 p.m. Eastern. We'll be hearing from Lee Graham, Randy Labonte, Verena Roberts, and Ian O'Byrne on open learning in K-12 and blended learning environments. This will be based on a chapter in the Handbook of K-12 Online and Blended Learning Research that they authored. So be sure to join us on Tuesday the 11th. We've got about a couple weeks now before that webinar hits. Should be an interesting topic for sure. In the meantime, if you have any feedback for us on the webinar process or on any of our initiatives, please reach out to us via email at mvlri@mivu.org. You can also sign up for our mailing list, where we remind folks of our upcoming webinars and our other ongoing initiatives. You can click that link there where you'll be taken to a form to sign up for our mailing list. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Our handles are listed there, as well as our LinkedIn page, our YouTube channel, where we'll be hosting the recording of this webinar and all of our past webinars. So be sure to check out that YouTube channel to try and find maybe some professional development opportunities there. And you can check out our webinars page, where you can see the archive of all of our past webinars. We've compiled quite a list over the last 12 or 18 months now. So be sure to check that out. And you can see all of the upcoming webinars that we have scheduled on that webinars page as well. Thank you, Victoria, for sharing your Twitter handle. That's at Raish Victoria. So we encourage folks to go check out Victoria on Twitter there so we can stay engaged in the conversation around this work. We really appreciate that. With that, I will dismiss everyone. I hope everyone has a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Take care.